Well, that's really loud. I didn't think it would be that loud. So I've been playing Morrowind like a fiend, like a maniac. And I'm editing my Morrowind video now. It's like 50 minutes. I'm like 15 minutes in. And I'm a little sick of editing. So I'm gonna make a little tier list video, a little tier list stream. So like, I guess to preempt, right, when you talk about tier lists for stuff, that's what draws out all the losers. You know, that's what draws out all the nerds. The kind who like to go, well, actually. So that other video I made was like, if you want to get into the game, the information's there for like, yeah, Dunmer's the best race in the game for your first time, right? Obviously, the game is designed that way. You can do whatever you want, but that's like the most helpful for a new person. This, though, is more like, what do I think is the best in the game? Just like the best of the best. Just know, like, with meta knowledge and everything. Why is the Breton doing the, like, Brian Griffin pose? But yeah, trying to think. I needed to say something. This is races. The reason I chose to start with races is because there's essentially the three playstyles of Elder Scrolls games, right? RPGs in general. And in those, you essentially do warrior, mage, and thief. Thief is kind of assassin-like, but it's, you know, combat, magic, stealth. And in general, I think that the races are all built on either one of these or hybridized versions of these builds. And we went over that on the other one. However, that was for new players. I'm just going to rank how good or bad they are. So I feel like to start off, we have to talk about the fact that Thief is bad. It is the weakest. It's viable, obviously, because Morrowind is like New Vegas, where literally everything is doable. But that does not mean it's good. It means it's just okay and serviceable. But it's still the worst out of the bunch. There's a few reasons for this. So when you play as a thief, you're probably going to do short blade, hand-to-hand, and marksman. Those are the thief combat skills. So then you get into a bunch of issues. Bows. Well, bows do okay damage. They're fine damage-wise in comparison to melee weapons, right? But you run into the issue where you can't use cast on strike bow effects. And custom enchanting arrows is either not available in vanilla, which I haven't been able to find it as available. So you have to mod that in. And getting area of effect arrows requires a plugin. It is an official plugin, but it still requires a plugin. And it's limited to like very certain things. So your ability to enchant your bow and arrow is already worse. No cast on strike really harms it. Because most builds really want to get to really powerful enchantments, right? You can still do cast on use from bows. And the Bone Mold bow has an enchant value of 40. So you can still do a really powerful bow enchantment. But at that point, you're just using spells. Right? If you're not casting on strike, then you're just a mage that's holding a bow. So marksman kind of sucks from that perspective. Then you've got hand-to-hand, which LOL. Without mods, hand-to-hand is like meme status. It's like, it's not efficient. Like, it is technically efficient in combat, as in hand-to-hand is equally as viable as other skills. But it just takes forever. It's super time-consuming and boring. And again, there are shortcuts to hand-to-hand. Damage, fatigue, and paralyze, but at that point, you're a mage. You know? At that point, you're a mage that's also using hand-to-hand. You're not a thief. Short blade is okay. You get some really good weapons like Keening and the Dagoth Dagger early on. There's also a good amount of just set rewards, and like you can get glass weapons really early if you're doing short blade. which is all very good. However, short blade kind of falls back into the problem of the point of short blade is to more or less stun lock an enemy. So, but the problem is you can just kill enemies with other weapons. And if the point is to spam the enchantment, you can do that with any weapon. So you sort of run into an issue where it's like the advantages of short blade are so minuscule, and they're so much worse early on than long blade that you don't really get early advantages. You have like a window of maybe an hour or two in the game where the fact that you spec'd into short blade makes you stronger than if you hadn't. But like other than that, man, short blade just kind of sucks. So your like offensive options as a thief are kind of like, okay, you're definitely the worst out of the three. But then you've also run into the problem of like thieving is harder than other playstyles. And using stealth in combat is harder than other playstyles. So when you run up to an enemy, right, and you hit them with a mace, the game runs one hit chance calc, and then you hit the enemy, right? One roll. And because you're a warrior, right, and you're going to be all thick and muscular, and you're going to hit your enemies once and clobber them, you just need to roll that one roll. Right? Let me crack open a cold one here. Oh, it has that echo. That's what we like to hear. So, when you're a warrior, right, and you just have to roll that one roll to hit a mace and like demolish your opponent in one blow, you roll one roll. If you're a mage, you roll one roll to get a really powerful spell off and your opponent's dead. Maybe you roll two. Maybe you do some super weird meta thing where you're like using a restoration spell to fortify your destruction to cast a destruction successfully. But, you know, that's more fringe, niche stuff. Most of the time you can just throw a fireball, right? But for stealth, you have to roll stealth to make sure you're detected. Then the game is going to repeatedly roll stealth over and over again. So not only are you rolling stealth, you're rolling it constantly because it's constantly being checked every few seconds. And then on top of that, you have to roll your attack to get the critical hit. So you're not only stacking two rolls, where every other build is stacking like maybe one, you're also then having to continuously re-roll one of those rolls every few seconds. And it's not bad, obviously. In Morrowind you can do anything. You can literally beat Morrowind by not playing Morrowind. You can just run up to Keening and Sunder, level 1, and just beat the game. But, like, in terms of, like, fun and comparative to each other, Thief is just, like, dog water compared to even just a pure warrior. So, from that perspective, right, you look at all the races, and you look at, do they facilitate which playstyle? The worst. Yeah, surprising no one. This is fairly common. I tried to look up tier lists because I like background noise when I play my game. And the only tier list I could find was like, yeah, these guys suck. You lose out on the boots and some helmets, which a lot of close-faced helmets in the game are very powerful. If you're not using mods, the Telvanni Cephalopod helm is like the best enchant value. You lose out on that. Boots of Blinding Speed, obviously, if you're not using mods. Khajiit and Argonians just have to be slow. On top of that, you're spec'd heavy into Thievery. And specifically, like, hand-to-hand. The Khajiit just does not start with anything. You have Demoralize, which is very useful early on. There are a lot of enemies, if you're playing on the max difficulty, that hitting Demoralize on in like an enclosed space can let you just wail on them until they're dead. But that's not very... You could probably also get through like the Orc or Red Guard abilities, right? It's kind of niche. One very useful effect they have if you're playing with a Legacy Lighting on is Night Eye. You can use Night Eye infinitely as a Khajiit, which is actually very useful for certain areas. If you have legacy lighting on, some areas are like really dark, and you actually do need to use effects to see them. But other than that, I think the best thing about a Khajiit is that you start off with like minimum 20 acrobatics, which isn't nothing. That allows you to live a lot of falls that you wouldn't otherwise. But yeah, being a pure thief, kind of doo-doo. Bosmer, immediately above them. You basically are just a Khajiit, but you can wear boots and helmets, and you're spec'd more into marksman. Which, I do think bows and arrows are better than hand-to-hand. But yeah, Bosmer kind of suck. Your ability is worse. The Beast Tongue one is like worthless. The only thing I can say about Bosmer that I love is that I love when you get hit as a Bosmer and you go like, yay! The voice acting in this game is so bad. The Bosmer is one of the worst in like a really good way. And then I think a tier above Bosmer are gonna go Argonians. Argonians are really weird. They're hybridized towards like magic and combat. You still can't wear shoes or helmets, which honestly, I think honestly, yeah, they're not that. That's such a detriment if you're not playing with mods. You start off with really good spear, athletics, and mysticism. It's like such a meme setup, but it's really fun. Obviously, you can just ignore your build anyways, but by that logic, there wouldn't be a tier list. But yeah, Argonians, they also have a very useful aspect of they don't have water breathing. For some reason, they couldn't just code that into the game. So they cast water breathing with a 5-point spell that's guaranteed to cast, which sounds very minor. But it actually has a very tangible benefit early on. Because the spell is a castable spell, but it's guaranteed to cast, you can actually train your alteration very easily as an Argonian. Which, like, if you're gonna, like, run around the cities early on instead of going out and exploring, like, when you run around Vivek, you can just cast your water breathing over and over. You'll gain a few alteration levels, which is, like, that's something early on. But, like, yeah, Spear is obviously not the best melee skill. Mysticism low-key kind of is the best offensive magic school, but not early. But you speed up like Alm Sylvie and Divine Intervention, Mark and Recall, which is like really good. But overall, yeah. Boots and helmets are just so important because of the boots of blinding speed. Imperial, fucking Brian Griffin ass pose. Is that Imperial? Yeah, Breton's the one with the axe. Imperials are okay. They're actually really good early on. They're good for an early game. So they have an incredible personality stat of 50 without any modification. They are spec'd into like light blade and light armor and long blade, and I think like mercantile and speechcraft. Which, because of how valuable money is in this game early on, they speed up the early game quite a bit. But it's a question of whether or not you want to get out of the early game faster. In a meta perspective, it's kind of more... You kind of start to want to slow down the early game a little bit because of how quickly the mid game goes. So it just depends on what you want out of your character. But I'd say that because they can just essentially speed up, like cut in half the early game with mercantile and personality, that it's pretty good. Obviously light armor, long blade, very good. Honestly, I tried using an orc, and they don't really feel like they're built for anything. You've got, like, some magic resistance, which is, like, cool, I guess. You've got, like, multiple armor types and armorer, which, like, makes a lore sense, but you've got, like, some combat skills, and, like, endurance, but you're still not as good as, like, a Nord immediately, or, like, a Redguard. They feel very bizarre. Not to mention, it's hilarious they're side by side because orcs have the worst personality stat in the game. Orcs, low key. I think orcs actually are going to go down here because of this. Orcs have such a terrible personality that if you don't invest into your personality as an orc, you will literally be barred out of certain factions because you are an orc. And I believe they're the only race that has such a low personality that this happens to them. Just by default. You can't join, I think, the Thieves Guild, the Temple, I believe... Thieves Guild and Temple. I believe you can't join the Imperial Legion cult or the Legion itself. I think you're barred out of those and the East Empire Company. I think. Until you raise your personality, which isn't impossible, but I think for most, considering how much people meme on personality as being a dump stat, you don't want to be investing into that early on. And delaying the being able to join these factions isn't the end of the world, I guess, because their quests early on are kind of, like, drawn out, but still, it's... The fact that you just straight up cannot join multiple factions at the start because of your personality is really bad. And you're just outclassed as a warrior by other races. Nords are better than Bretons. They have 50 endurance, I think, no matter what. I might be mistaken. Women are just as strong as the men, which is good because women are better to play as in this game. You're spec'd into not Longblade. You're spec'd into, I think, Axe and Blunt, and then I think medium and heavy armor. But you just have really good starting attributes. You're immune to frost, which is pretty cool. Argonians are immune to poison, which is cool. It's not the best, but it is good. And you resist shock. Both of those are really valuable. But you're just outclassed by Redguard. Which Redguard are ridiculous. Longblade's the best weapon skill in the game. You can tag Longblade, specialize in combat. You start with 50 in the skill. Incredible. Actually amazing. Adrenaline Rush is just like an I win button. You just hit Adrenaline Rush, and then literally it basically just treats it as if you just gained like 10 levels of attributes. You resist poison and disease, which is actually very useful early on, especially the disease, before you get the cure for Corpus. I think the only downside to a Redguard is that it essentially dictates that you have to choose one of the magically inclined signs. Because you don't have a inherent multiplier in your magicka. Which is literally saying that you're so perfect in every way except that you're also not perfect at magic. Redguard is insane. Dunmer are also in A tier. Notable specifically behind the Redguard. But I still hold that the Dunmer's a really good starting race. You can basically hybrid any class you want. Like, Legion guy is like hybriding like Thief and Warrior. This is hybriding like Warrior Mage. This is a hybrid of like all three. You can choose any direction to go in. Being able to tag Longblade and Light Armor for good benefits early on is really good because of the natural Longsword progression, and then Dark Brotherhood Armor. Resistance to fire is very valuable, and with this you can do things like AoE fire spells with no damage, with no fear of reflect. One of my favorite things to do was to enchant a sword that had an area of effect fire damage on a Dunmer and just spam it. Because you don't risk any reflect, because if it reflects, it's not going to do any damage to you. Not to mention, there's a lot of items in the game that can just allow you to become fully immune to fire. Which as a Dunmer means you can spam that even easier. Ancestor Guardian is one of those powerful racial abilities in the game. You basically just get a one-day get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not quite as powerful as Adrenaline Rush because you're not offensively boosted. But you become, like, really difficult to kill with Ancestor Guardian. Which, like, even late game, you can just activate that, and then you're just even stronger. It's, like, useful the entire game. And then Altmer. I think that Altmer and Breton are both the top race for different reasons. So, like, obviously Altmer have more magic, but they're weak to everything magical, basically. 50% Magicka weakness, 50% fire weakness, and I think 25 shock and frost weakness. You resist disease, which is very epic, and you're neutral to poison. I think that's the only thing Altmer are neutral to magic-wise is poison. But you have either 1 or 1.5 times magic. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it's 1.5. It's fairly significant. I mean, why don't I just look it up? This is like the one people argue about. Where is it magic and multiplier? So 0.5, 1.5. Yeah, it's significantly more than 0.5. So it means at 100 you would have 250 magicka. That is actually very significant. Morrowind is very easy, as in you can pretty much just choose whatever race you want and end up overpowered. However, these are the two races that I think have the single most late game optimization to them. Because the only thing you can't in any respect do is, even if you end up super overpowered by the end game, if you want to be using magic, you do have to actually choose to be an Altmer, a Breton, or alter your birth sign to achieve that. 100 magicka just simply is not enough to be a mage in the end game, and you need something. Which is why I think the Altmer is the best, because you get the biggest inherent pull. An Altmer, for instance, has the freedom to actually choose a non-magic birth sign, or to stack the birth sign and actually just be ridiculously overpowered. Whereas a Breton's 0.5 isn't really enough to get the job done. A Breton, by contrast, has 50% resist magic, but only a 50% bonus. So at 100, it's 150 magicka instead of 250. And then you have Dragon Skin, which gives you 50 armor for half a minute. It's basically like these two racial powers. It's like that kind of level where it's that powerful. Because the armor cap is 300. Most characters that I've played ended up with an armor of about 100 near their late game, but I never went out of my way to max my armor stat. So, like, this just always bumps you to, like, about halfway. Dragon Skin does. The reason having a Magicka intelligence multiplier is so important, this little number, is because any character can put Fortify Magicka on their equipment to have a higher Magicka pool. However, if you do Fortify Intelligence on someone with a Magicka multiplier bonus, the intelligence will be boosted. So if a Breton has 50 points of boost intelligence on their gear, that would be 75 effectively. Which is really important when you get to characters like this. So, like, if you do, like, an Altmer with, like, what is the Apprentice, 1.5? 1.5. Stack that with Altmer to get basically 3 times. So at 100, you'd have 400 magicka. And then put, like, 50 points of that intelligence that would have given you 75 on the Breton normally. And 50 times 3, you'd basically end up with like 200 magicka from that. So you can get to some pretty insane numbers like that. But either way, you need to have at least the bare minimum magicka multiplier if you want to be a mage in the late game. And being a mage is the best in the game. I'd say it's the strongest playstyle, for a lot of reasons. But as long as you have a deep enough magicka pool, you are God in this game. You can bypass every other skill in the game with enough magicka, and even if you're not using weird, sort of cheesy styles to get yourself overpowered, just magicka on its own is just very strong compared to other playstyles. I would actually say offensively, if you're not using sort of cheese stuff, that magic is a little bit weaker than melee for like combat, but everywhere else it's just better. And unlike Oblivion, you can wear armor with your mage, so it doesn't matter. You can just stack armor and this, and you're good. But I would say this is the tier list. The thing with the Breton is, if you take this and Apprentice, you cancel out your magic weakness, so you're neutral to all magic and neutral to all damage, but you have an insane magicka pool. Whereas the High Elf is just sort of accepting that you're going to have a weakness, which will make the early game harder. There's a lot of, like, for instance, like the Morag Tong, a lot of people get sent to killer mages. There's a lot of those contracts you're going to have to put off for a little bit or get very creative to get around as a High Elf, because you'll just die. You know? You're also going to have to be way more careful about using something like Goldbrand as a High Elf. It'll just get reflected on you and you'll vaporize. But I do think that magicka pool is king. So I would say that I've done a High Elf as an Apprentice, and it makes the early game tough against magic, but like against anything that isn't magical, you're a god. And you don't have to fight magical enemies for a while if you don't want to. But like, yeah, being a High Elf Apprentice that like did the Telvanni questline, I was just fucking invincible. It's such an early powerhouse, and it affects the late game too. But I do respect the Breton a lot. They're both very good. Like, honestly, the only thing that I think being a High Elf would be worse on is if you're going to go to, like, the DLC areas. Like, if you're going to go to Mournhold, a lot of those enemies you're going to fight have, like, inherent Reflect. It's just harder to get away with being weak to magic in, like, Mournhold or Solstheim. But, like, everywhere else you're fine. You'd rather be a High Elf. I think if you're going to go to, like, the DLCs, I'd rather be a Breton. Otherwise, be a High Elf. But that's what I think for races. Let's get to signs. Let's see, best A, B, C, the worst. I cannot tell what these are by picture, which is why I have the little thing open. I can tell this one's the Steed, which is obviously C tier. Boots of Blinding Speed are available within the first hour. You don't have to fight anything other than wild creatures. As long as you're not on max difficulty, you can get the Boots of Blinding Speed in the first 30 minutes of gameplay. So, Steed is kind of worthless. If it fortified you past 100, I could maybe see it, but it doesn't. It only fortifies you to 100. So, yeah, kind of unfortunate. But I will say for a new player, this is very valuable. It can actually make them early game tolerable. Oh, I think these just might try to be alphabetical. So like this would be the Tower, which is pretty bad. It lets you unlock one spell of, I think, 75 or lower a day. And it gives you Detect everything. And Detect is worthless in this game. And Open is extremely easy to do with either Security skill, Alteration skill, or Restoration skill. You don't need to waste your, like, potentially game-altering ability that you get at the start of the game on being able to open locks. Actually, you know, it's so ass. I think the Steed has to go higher. War Word. It's an effect that you can't replicate anywhere else in the game. Permanent 10% chance to hit. I mean, you feel that at every point in the game. It's just kind of minor by the end of the game, but at the early game, you can do this if you want to. Maybe if you're doing some weird feng shui where you're like being an Altmer and you choose all magical skills as majors, You know, maybe pick the war word to like still hit with weapons. You know, like be an Altmer that uses conjuration as a major, summon a bound longsword. Here, let me get this. Yeah. But yeah, you do that, and then like stack Warward with bound longsword bonus. I mean, hey, that's probably something. Thief is Activary Danger Sense. Very similarly, you get permanent plus 10 Sanctuary, and Sanctuary is much more powerful than Agility in the late game. I feel like this is more useful. I feel like it's much easier to hit high hit chance than high evasion. This would be Shadow, which is just invisibility once a day. It's like better than the tower, but it's still pretty bad. Okay, invisibility in this game actually does bypass your sneak check, I'm fairly certain, unlike Chameleon. But since it wears off the moment you activate it, it's kind of ass. It's always been balanced like that, to where you have to basically get to a point to where you can spam invisibility for it to be useful. So just getting it once a day is not useful at all. I tried to make a case for it in the build video that, like, well, maybe you can sneak past an enemy that you need to fight, and it's like, that's fair. Enemies don't go between cells, so, like, if you want to go, like, rush the Fist of Randagolf or something, you can enter Illume B, run past all the enemies, Boots of Blind Speed, and then use Moonshadow to get to the Fist of Randagolf in, like, the boss room, and then use, like, Alm Civi out or something. So, like, you can just get the scrolls that guarantee the effect in, like, Balmora, and then, you know, just sneak in, use your ability. There's a lot of fringe cases. You can probably rush a lot of items if you have super game knowledge with Moonshadow, but, like, you don't need to. Like, if you rush the game like that, you basically just eliminate the progression out of the game. So I don't know that it's that useful or that good, even if you want to do it. But hey, if you want to do it, Moonshadow probably has that use. So this would be Serpent, because that was Shadow and Steed. Serpent is one of those shitty once a day powers. I don't remember what it is. It's bad enough that I never pick it. There's an argument to be said there. Turn Undead, those are meme effects. Restore health 100 points. That's pretty good. That's a full heal for like the first 10 levels or so, right? That's not bad. I'll put that like up here. It's like way better than these. Poison, 3 points for 30 seconds on touch. Damage health, 1 point for 30 seconds. This can straight up kill a lot of early game characters if you don't tag endurance or strength. And poison is like the worst offensive skill. And then super long duration. So even then, what are you doing with it? Like, you're gonna poison an enemy, and then they're gonna attack you for those 30 seconds while you're taking health damage. It's worse than Shadow. Is there any other ability? No. Might be worse than the tower, actually. Now that I'm actually thinking about it. I just don't know the scenario where that's a good ability to use. If you end up like completely immune to magic, sure. But at that point, you don't need this. If you're strong enough that you're just immune to magic, like downside magic, then you don't need this. I'll put it above the tower. The tower's pretty bad. I recognize this guy, this little hat, that's the Lord. It gives you an ability that restores 60 health once a day, which is just worse than this. And it makes you permanently weak 100% to fire. It's actually so abysmal. It's such a meme, like... Yeah, it's an ability you activate. So, why on earth would you ever pick this over Mara's gift, which is just immediate? My only theory for why this is in the game I have two theories. One is that they originally wanted to get rid of this and just have it be that it was a constant restore health 2 points. Because that's like an enchantment you can activate later on. So maybe the point is that if you pick the Lord, and you were a vampire, you could do this to just become like giga weak to fire, but help negate the sun weakness. Which I like quite a bit. That would be very cool. And it would also make the early game a little bit easier, because like when you're fighting mostly melee enemies, this is super helpful. And then in the mid to late game, you start feeling the weakness to fire. But because it's an activation ability, it's worthless, because it's just strictly worse than where is it? The ritual? Yeah, it's just strictly worse. So the only value this has is if you want to play like the hardest game of Morrowind, and you want to pick the everything suboptimal, you'd pick this. It's got like roleplay potential, because you just pick the worst stone. It's supposed to make you unlucky. So Mage is up here. Mage, I kind of go back and forth on. The Mage is only 50%. So you end up in this situation where the benefit you get from the birth sign is so negligible that it doesn't help you late game. Even stacking a bunch of Fortify Intelligence items, this is not 150 isn't enough magic to pull for late game spells, if you actually start using really powerful spells. But I think the specific use case for the Mage is if you want to be a high elf and you don't want to add the extra weakness of the apprentice, but at that point you would honestly probably rather just pick the Atronach. Still, being specifically useful for like the Altmer and Breton, since you would have a bigger pool by default and then stack this, is still good enough to put it up here. If that's the case, then I can't tell what these are. If this is Mage, then Element, this is Lover's Grace. The Lover. Gives you 25 points endurance and personality. I go back and forth a lot on this. If you play without mods, you're going to hit such a high level that even with no endurance investment, your health will skyrocket out of control by the end game. To a point to where I've actually considered trying to figure out a way to nerf endurance health gain per level. Because you want your endurance super high for your fatigue management, but you don't want just infinite health, or else it eliminates the challenge of the game. And if you rush your endurance to get rid of the fatigue issue, you just end up like fucking unkillable with the amount of health you end up with. Not to mention 25 points personality early on is enough to either negate the weaknesses of the orc or make any other character actually good smooth talker early on. It's really powerful. I don't know. I've done a build before where I picked a lady and was a red guard. And my god, I was so jacked early on, and I could actually talk to people and I could hit things, and it was like, if you pick the lady as a red guard, it's literally like you skip a portion of the game. It's like actually that powerful in game warping. I don't know these by picture. I know that two of these are the Apprentice and Astronaut, but I don't know what the third one is. Oh, that's Lady. So, yeah, you're up there, and you're the Lover. I don't remember what the Lover does. No, I do. It's 25 points agility. Yeah, that's B tier. 25 points of agility. It's got the same issue as the Lover and Steed, in that the points don't count past 100. It just gets you to 100 faster, which obviously every character ever will reach 100 in all stats. But the point is obviously early game. That gives you an evasion bonus early on. It lets you hit with all weapons early on. Gives you more fatigue early on. The immediate benefit is much stronger than like something like Akaviri Danger Sense or Warward. But the late game, obviously you could have gotten your stats to 100. Honestly, I think the best use of this is that in combination with either of those, you get more fatigue. Having a big immediate fatigue pool is pretty good. But you could have done that with this one too. Yeah, even then the fatigue aspect, which is kind of the better aspect of it, is outshadowed by the Lady, which also just gives you insane fatigue. And Lady will also fortify endurance directly, which gives you better fatigue regeneration too. So it's just kind of outclassed by like all three of these. Unfortunately. Is there also an ability, like a once a day ability that goes with Lover? Or is it just paralyzed fatigue in exchange for damage, or paralyzed in exchange for damage fatigue? So it's kind of like double-edged sword thing. It's like, well, you can paralyze an opponent, but then you're not going to hit them. So, okay. The agility is what matters. Element OP, QRST. So, this would be Atronach. Gosh, I don't know. Again, it's basically really split. The Apprentice is like strong enough to make any character mage viable in the late game, as long as you either enchant some like fortify intelligence things on top of it, which is obviously really good. That's not good. My room is gonna cave in. But yeah, you make basically any character mage viable with Apprentice, and 50% weakness to magic is not game ending. You're gonna have like some trouble rushing like the Mentor's Ring, but other than that, you're fine. The late game enemies, again, if you go to DLC areas, you'll feel it a little bit, but it's nothing too bad. You can essentially, as long as you're not a high elf, you can essentially just ignore this by going and getting the Curse of the Savior's Hide, and considering Dark Brotherhood Assassin spawn at level 1, light armor is the best anyways, you're going to be spec'd into light armor. So being an apprentice is probably the best. However, I do think High Elf was the best race, and I think the best complementary sign for a High Elf is obviously the Atronach. So, Atronach is really overrated in terms of magic pull. People really just don't understand that other people don't like wasting time in certain ways. So, like, this gets into, like, a meta argument about what is wasting time. But, like, it just depends on whether or not the time you wasted was time you enjoyed wasting. With an Atronach build, you basically just always have to be conscious of where you are to get to an Imperial Altar when you run out of magic. So you're not going to be able to use your one mark wherever you want. You're always going to have to keep your mark available for wherever you are. So you can't do like the super meta strategy and put it at the Sager's Mora docks and then get anywhere in the map in like 2 seconds. In like 1 minute. You're always going to have to use your mark for the immediate area you're in, or else you're going to have to travel back. Which is like, okay. Either that, or you have to figure out another way to get your magicka back, which means summoning ghosts and very tediously waiting to get your magicka back, or carrying potions which are going to weigh you down. Well, you can use the alchemy loop. Okay, at that point, none of these matter. So, I've done an Atronach build. It makes the game very easy in combat and very boring out of combat. Because you just have to fucking constantly micromanage your fatigue, your magicka. You have to constantly go out of your way to get it filled back up. It eliminates the possibility of being a mage warrior. You can't use destruction or mysticism like absorb health with this. You'll just run out too quickly. The magic pool isn't enough to counteract no regen. The actual ability that's really powerful with this is in combat with spell absorption. The spell absorption is really powerful in combat, and you'll notice it. You'll feel it every fight. It's strong enough to essentially counteract the elf's weakness entirely, which is why I think it's so good. Because even though it's so unnecessary, the magical pool is not worth it over the apprentice because it's 2.5 instead of 1.5. It's not enough that you feel. And you basically can't be a destruction mage, or else you have to also then keep like scrolls of summons or summon ghosts or potions on hand. It gets fucking tedious. You're always micromanaging it, and it's not fun because it's solved. You go to an Imperial Shrine and you hit restore attributes. And like even past a certain point, it doesn't cost anything to do that. You're literally just wasting time going to the shrine and doing it. It's really ass. But on a high elf, it does lead to some of the strongest combat builds. If you're just gonna be a high elf but use a sword anyways, this is like probably the best stun in the game, if that's to you. Like, if you plan on being, like, a jack-of-all-trades build that doesn't need magic, then sure, but at that point, why are you even using this for magic? So it's, like, so weird. I personally hate it. I think it takes the fun out of the game. Like, I started a character with it, and once I realized how boring the solved meta is of, like, going to a Legion place, and then coming back, and then going somewhere else, and then, like, drinking potions, and, like, constantly managing it and fiddling with it, I just installed a Restore Magicka spell mod, and once I got constant effects, I added it back on. Because it's just so ass. It's so boring. And it's really paradoxical, because if you're going to use it, you can't really afford to rely on magic for combat, because you can't reliably get your magic back. So, like, it just leads to the situation where, like, to be a really good Astronaut, you would have to be, like, a melee warrior that has a ton of strength to carry potions. And it's like, at that point, you're just being a warrior. Yeah, I think Apprentice is better. It works better on every other race other than Altmer. As a Breton, you have complete neutrality and, like, a shit ton of magic. Any other race can essentially afford to do this either. And then that's enough to get you started on the game. And you also will then restore it with resting. So it has entire game potential. And it's not fucking annoying to deal with like the Atronach is. That's what I would do for birth signs. Let's be real. Okay, now I need this. So, no spoilers. We'll make this one green, and we'll make this one blue. Oh, why could that be? And then I want to do this as major, minor, and miscellaneous. I have the page open so I can tell what some of these are. Like, I would never have known that was acrobatics without that, so. Acrobatics. Acrobatics is a really weird skill, talking about it, because it's not really, it's your mobility. Acrobatics is essentially just your ability to survive fall damage and how high you can jump. Until you get to like 100, how high you can jump doesn't matter for traversal, really. Really, the 0 to 100 factor is just how much fall damage you can take, which is really important when you're going to start doing super jumps. Because you want to start doing super jumps. And you have to be able to survive them. Now, I don't know the concrete number on this, but essentially all skills below a certain threshold basically harm your ability to do the action rather than just not give a bonus. And like with no acrobatics at the start, you do feel it. You can die to a lot of falls that you can just shrug off by even like the 2 hours later. Just from your health gain per level, but acrobatics is really useful. It'll probably end up near the top of Misc, but it's not a good enough skill to tag. Just because you can always just train it eventually. And you don't need to be surviving those falls early on. What is this? Alteration. I would say Alteration is one of the better skills in the game. It's got its uses. Put it in minor at least. So, like, magic is really good. Alteration with open essentially allows you to ignore lockpicks at a high level. Alteration with levitate lets you fly, which is, like, necessary for certain portions of the game. Alteration has... What else does Alteration do? Those are really the two important ones. Oh, you can walk on water. That's, like, really invaluable. There's a lot of early game areas where if you have to swim, you'll basically just get overwhelmed by slaughterfish. Lets you breathe underwater. It's useful for, like, getting the gold brand. Feathers ass. Burden sucks. What else does Alteration do? Shield is too expensive. You'll never actually cast shield spells. But yeah, just levitate, water walk, and open are still this good. Obviously. Not having to worry about carrying around lockpicks and equipping them with to replace your weapon is pretty good. And lock. Lock is kind of niche, but it's sometimes really invaluable. You can essentially just lock a door, and since enemies can't pick locks, they're just stuck there. So they're just, you can literally just say nope and just lock a door and they just can't get to you. It's super funny to pull off. Oh, and levitate has offensive potential, which I need to talk about. I'll admit I would never have thought to do this ever on my own. Someone in my chat told me to do this, but it's really effective. If you make a levitate 1-point spell on target and then just make the radius and duration really big, your opponents basically just can't move. Because for most enemies in the game, they're better off using their movement speed and athletics rather than 1 point of levitate in their speed. If you have the Boots of Blinding Speed, then levitate is fine for you, but for enemies, it slows them down to a crawl. It's actually stronger than paralysis because of how cheap it is to cast. But yeah. Feather is just worse than Fortify Strength, though, which we'll get to in a bit. This is Armorer. So Armorer is, like, hard to explain. It's hard to gauge. Personally, I always tag Armorer as a major skill. Because no matter what playstyle you're going to try to do by the late game, you need to have... Almost always, you need to have armor on, and you need to be hitting things with a weapon. I've done pure mage builds, and they all necessitated a backup weapon. It's impossible to get a magicka pool in the game that is high enough to purely rely on magic. I have not been able to figure out how to do it, so maybe that's like a pure skill issue, but it feels like you always will end up needing that. And then all builds can layer armor on top of their best enchanted clothing. So every build optimally will use armor over unarmored. So armor is just always valuable. But it can be invalidated entirely by another class of school, like School of Magic. It's really difficult to level. The best use of it is early on, to tag it early on for the boost. But I don't know that it's one of the best skills in the game. Probably more useful early on than acrobatics. This is athletics. This is your movement speed. I mean, LOL. You really want to tag it if you want that immediate bonus, otherwise you're going to be running for a while. But yeah, it's your raw movement speed. It seems to have more of an impact on your speed than I think speed does. Just because getting the boots of blinding speed, I still like sometimes feel slow or not as fast as I could be, and then I'll get my athletics higher, and that'll make me start moving like a little too fast. Whereas getting 300 speed never makes me feel too fast, but 100 athletics does. So I think athletics is probably better for your movement speed than speed while you're running, but it doesn't affect levitate, so you still need to worry about speed outside of it. Axe is just worse than Longblade, but still cool, I guess. I don't even know of any good axes in the game. Like, I can't think of an axe that you can get like Gold Brand or like Scourge in such an easy way early on that'll just invalidate the game. This is block. I think block is one of the best skills in the game. If you successfully block, then you just eliminate all damage. Daedric Tower Shield has the best enchant value in the game out of any item at 225. Even better than Exquisite Amulets and Rings. And your shield contributes to your armor rating even if you have a two-handed weapon or magic. So, block is the best in the game. Block is really good. Mostly because of Daedric Tower Shield, but block is still good. Blunt, I'd say it's worse than Longblade, but better than Axe because you can get things like Scourge early on. Blunt is also uniquely powerful because it affects your staves. And the Ebony Staff has the highest enchant value of any weapon in the game at 90. So with a reliable chance to hit on that, you can do a super powerful enchant. And that's pretty good. The Ebony Staff is ridiculous when you enchant it. You can do AoE effects on it too. It gets nutty. Trebonius' staff is insanely funny and like really good. The Staff of Magnus is also really powerful. What? Is that like a little puppet on a string? What is that? Conjuration. Yeah, that makes sense. Conjuration is like one of the best skills, and it's like one of those ones where it falls off really hard, but it's really powerful early on. So bound weapons have stats identical to Daedric and damage, so insane damage. And they have a plus 10 skill modifier. So let's say that you pick a Breton and you don't tag Longblade, so you're going to have like 5 Longblade. Bound Longsword is 10, so that's 15. Which is obviously still bad. It's not good enough to reliably use, but compare that to a Breton that tagged Longblade as a minor, it's literally the same thing. So you can literally just treat it as if it's a minor skill. Where did I put it? Oh, there it is. Bound armor is effectively equal to maxed out unarmored. It's a little different. There's like a few number difference, but it's not. It's minimal. But effectively, it's just really good early on. Very cheap to cast. Bound boots are a speed modifier, so you don't have to worry about losing out too much speed. Obviously, it's not the boots of blinding speed, but it's still good. And then you can get, obviously, a Daedric shield very early with this. Ridiculously easy and cheap to cast bound weapons and armor. By like 30 or 40 conjuration, I could reliably summon like a 5-minute bound longsword spell. And like your custom spells are always worse cost efficient wise than like a vanilla one. So like you can just do some ridiculous spells. Summoning creatures is a little more iffy. They're always too expensive to be of any help, but they exist. So, but even then, there is value in this because being able to reliably summon a Golden Saint means that you get to like start whacking on it before it aggroes on you for soul trapping, which we're gonna get to is a little important. So I would honestly put this right below alteration. It's still very useful. One of the best skills in the game. This has to be destruction, which is I would say the worst magic school. I would say mysticism is better for offensive magic, and then you've got things like damage from destruction, which I would also just say absorb attributes better. What does a destruction do that's like invaluable that you can't replace? Certain enemies just have certain weaknesses, so even if you can use absorb, you might just want to use fire to like one shot like a skeleton war wizard or whatever. But it's a little fringe when that comes up. It's not very often. I don't think so. Destruction is also ridiculously expensive. Like casting like a 100.50 radius spell is like almost 100 magicka. As opposed to like you can make a weapon that has like a similar effect, like an ebony Schmidtmar or an ebony staff, and you'll get like that comparable effect that you can spam. So destruction is just really bad. Destruction is uniquely powerful early on though, because it's much easier to get a consistent hit chance than it is with a weapon. So like touch spells early on are like ridiculously easy to get off, and they're comparable in power to like weapons. Which I would say is very good. Obviously, early on, if you tag like an Altmer, high elf with like major destruction specializing in magic, you can have close to 100% chance right off the bat, which is very valuable early on. But by the mid game, even destruction kind of falls off. Hand to hand, we went over why that's like probably the worst combat skill. Heavy armor. Obviously, it's the fastest road to the max armor rating. Few problems though. One, the ebony mail exists, so medium armor is just as good. Curse of the Savior's Hide exists, so light armor is just as good. And you get Dark Brotherhood armor of 1, so light armor is king. Dark Brotherhood armor essentially invalidates the armor tier system. Because, like, what they're going for is the idea that, like, as your armor rating gets better, the gear gets heavier, you know, blah, blah, blah. But Dark Brotherhood armor just shatters that progression. Because, like, maybe you might want to do something where, like, you tag medium armor so that you get better armor than light armor early, but you can still carry things, unlike heavy armor where you just wouldn't be able to move. And then switch to heavy armor late in the game or whatever. Or maybe you're trying to go for like a low strength build that's going to be a mage, so you might tag light armor just so that you can still have protection, but you can move. But no, Dark Brotherhood armor makes light armor the best skill, and you can just be any build on top of that. Because it doesn't cost anything to carry and has the best protection until... It feels like it has the best protection until you find like glass or like ebony or like endural armor. Even then, I think Dark Brotherhood armor with a highlight armor skill is like more efficient than endural because you have like a full set, and endural doesn't even have greaves, and you can't wear the helmet or cuirass in vanilla. So yeah, man, Dark Brotherhood armor is kind of OP. What is the eye? Illusion. It's invaluable. Charm invalidates like speechcraft, and to a degree like mercantile and personality. Frenzy invalidates the taunt system. Chameleon can help with stealth, but it doesn't completely bypass it. Invisibility can bypass stealth. Like I said, Frenzy also bypasses the bounty system, because anyone you frenzy doesn't count as a bounty. This is like invaluable for doing the Morag conquest without getting your stolen gear confiscated. Pacify is really useful for getting to like skill trainers. The Master Enchant skill trainer, for instance, is always hostile until you calm him. And Enchant is a good skill, which we're going to get to, so that's kind of valuable. This will help raise people's disposition in order to progress quests. You can even get a little funky with it. Silence is an illusion skill, and it basically cuts off an enemy's ability to use magic. If you're doing like a Morag conquest, and you keep getting like fucked up by like some dude that keeps using a spell that annihilates you because you're an apprentice, then just preempt the battle with silence, and he can't move. Paralysis is illusion. That's an incredibly powerful effect if you use it right. Yeah, just illusion is insane. Low-key a little more useful than alteration, even. Longsword is king. You didn't get too many. Like, immediately, right? You go find Tarheel, enchanted longsword. I mean, okay. You don't even have to worry about the enchantment value on Ghost now. You can just immediately attack Ghost. Some of the best weapons in the game. Goldbrand is super easy to get. It's like a late game weapon. Ebony Schmidtmar has the highest enchant value out of weapons that like deal damage, unlike the Ebony Staff. Both of the DLC weapons, the Hope's Flame and Truce Fire, are a long blade. There's other long blades you get that are really good. Swords of White Woe and Unpatched Vanilla are really powerful and available early. The Ice Blade of the Monarch and Chrysamere and Mage Bane are all really, really good weapons that you just get for doing the main quest. A Daedric Katana and Daikatana are really powerful weapons to enchant in the mid-game. And, like, honestly, a Daikatana can hold a really powerful 100 strength for 3-second enchantment that's really powerful. Longblade is also really good because with two-handed weapons you get some of the highest base damage in the game. And with one-handed weapons you can still use your shield, which helps your tankiness while also allowing you to be offensive. And then, what else does Longblade do? There's something else that does this really good. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Oh, just best gear progression. No matter what faction you go to or what you do, you'll end up just constantly upgrading your Longblade. Better and better weapons. Tons of set locations that you can very easily get really powerful Longblades. A guy in Ghostgate just sells a glass longsword. I mean, the moment you want to, you can just go there and buy it, as long as you have the money. Bound longsword is one of the best bound weapons in the game. It's useful even in the like late and sort of post game to just have a permanent weapon that just does good damage that you can just constantly summon. You can even do like a sort of meta build where you just don't even carry a weapon and just conjure a bound sword at the start of the game, and you're stronger than most characters that would carry a weapon. Archery is better than hand-to-hand. Mercantile is really, really powerful. This gets into one of those discussions, right? Where it's like, are you trying to play the game or are you trying to bypass the game? Mercantile affects training, it affects purchases, and it affects bribing, which are all basically ways to just skip the game. In an objective sense, I think Mercantile is probably the bronze medal skill in the game. But it's really hard to gauge, and it kind of leads into like a really weird discussion about whether or not the strongest skills are the ones that allow you to ignore gameplay or the ones that enable it. Which we're going to get into with the other two really good skills. But yeah, Mercantile is ridiculous, obviously. The haggling feature is not useful, really. I haven't really been able to feel out or get use out of haggle much, but passive mercantile skill is like invaluable in this game. To the point to where I installed an economy overhaul mod that just makes it that everything is more expensive because of the impact Mercantile has on the game. It's really strong. I just went full screen and I have to go check what this is. This looks like a beetle. What is this? Mysticism. Oh, the top tier skill right there. It's pretty good. Absorb health is stronger than any destruction effect because it can't be reflected. Absorb fatigue is like stronger than damage fatigue because it also impacts your ability to keep on top. Teleportation is obviously one of the most valuable skills in the game. Telekinesis basically bypasses the probe aspect of security. What else does mysticism do other than all of those incredible and valuable things? I think it's also detect and dispel. Dispel is very valuable because you can do something like use a levitate spell to reach somewhere and then dispel so that you're walking around. That's really useful. I think that's underestimated how useful dispel is as a convenience spell on top of like everything else mysticism does. And then yeah, Mark and Recall and Almcivi Divine Intervention are just like probably the most valuable convenience features in the game. What is that? Is that restoration and armored? Restoration is also a contender for bronze medal. Really, really powerful. I think people underestimate restoration quite a bit in this game. Fortify skill is the one of the most powerful warping effects in the game. You create a fortify armorer spell, right? That lasts for 1 or 2 seconds. I like to do 2 seconds because I'm a little slow on putting the. I like wiggle room when I cast a spell to go do it in the menu. So you cast a 100 spell for 2 seconds, go in the menu, you can now successfully repair 100% of the time. You do an alchemy for 100 spell for 2 seconds, you can create any potion you want and you'll be able to see the effects from level 1. You create that effect from Mercantile, you can buy anything for dirt cheap. You create that for enchanting, you do enough fortify enchantings with restoration. You can start doing those like impossible enchants that are like capped at 80% or whatever, you can start pushing past it. You do fortify speechcraft. Like, let's say that you want to do a trainer, right? And you don't want to fortify your mercantile every time you do it. Fortify your speechcraft and then admire them up to like 90 or 100 with restoration. That way it stays at 100 for training sessions. You need to bypass a quest? Well, you can use charm, but you can also use fortify personality. And you can do that trick I talked about, fortify personality, fortify speechcraft and luck. And then boom, you can just instantly admire someone 100. Even if they're not at 100 after fortify personality. Fortify strength invalidates like feather, for instance. You can just do, because every 1 point of strength is 5 points, so 20 points is 100 points, which is feather 100. But it's like way cheaper to cast. It's like 30 versus 150. You can do fortify skill. So like one of the craziest things is, let's say that you have like an illusion spell that's really hard to cast because you have like 20 illusion, but you have like 40 restoration. Go make a fortify illusion spell for 5 seconds at 100 magnitude, and you can guaranteed cast that spell. You can essentially bypass the other schools of magic with restoration, which is crazy. Obviously, fortify speed makes you move faster. Fortify luck lets you bypass gambling. Fortify strength lets you carry stuff and hit stuff harder. Fortify personality bypasses conversations. Fortify endurance is kind of useful, I guess, for fatigue, but at that point, just restore fatigue. Restore fatigue. No carrying around potions for fatigue if you have magicka. Restoration. Restore health. I can't believe it took this long to get to restore health on restoration. So incredible. Um, Fortify attribute also not only is useful for like active effects, but it allows you to bypass your training limit. So if you have like 50 personality and your illusion is 50 and you want to keep training it, Fortify illusion, then you can train. Which is honestly more easy and less janky than doing damage from the destruction spell for training. And then, what else can you do with restoration? Other than all those fucking absolutely incredible things. You can do Fortify Intelligence if you have one of the Intelligence multiplier effects. Like, if you have an Apprentice and you do Fortify Intelligence like 25, 30 points, you'll get more Magicka than it costs to cast a spell. Which early on is kind of useful to like bypass your Magicka limit. Cure Common Disease, Cure Blight Disease, really invaluable before you get access to the Corpus immunity. Cure Poison is really cool if you want to try and force your way through like trapped chests and stuff. It's kind of worse than just restoring your health as the damage happens, but yeah, it's got its effects. Shout out to Cure Paralyzation. Cure Paralyzation is hilarious, by the way. I know that I'm trying to hype up Restoration, but shout out to Cure Paralyzation, a spell that needs to be cast to cure paralysis when you can't cast spells. You can't even enchant it on anything. I've tried this with mods, but Cure Paralyzation has a value of 500. It can't even be put on the Daedric Tower Shield. Actual worthless effect in the game. It's just in the game because I think they need it for certain other scripts. Security we went over is like kind of dookie dog water. You can just ignore it entirely. But like, oh, that was another aspect of restoration. Restoration, by the way. Fortify security, 100 points for 2 seconds. Cast it and then you might need to do 3 or 4 seconds if you're not using quick cast mods. But like 3 or 4 seconds. Pull out your lockpick and there you go, lockpick success. You don't even need anything better than an apprentice lockpick to 100% guarantee 100 locks with restoration. Oh, and Alteration has jump, which is really good. Alteration has jump, but you can also do Fortify Acrobatics, which is way cheaper than jump. It has less of an effect. I'm aware of that, but it's still comparable, and in the early game it's good enough. They both have their own uses. And you can stack them. So, Restoration is still really good. Ignore, Security, Short Blade. It's like, it's probably worse than Axe. I haven't found any good axes, but I'm sure they exist. Good axes, Morrowind. Stalrim axe, Daedric. I don't care about the in-game ones. You mean? Or okay, maybe they're not. Maybe it's not so good after all. Remember, conjuration is higher because you can bound weapons, not the weapon skills themselves. Yeah, short blade is really good then. You end up with like keening, which is like one of the best weapons in the game. Although keening, hilariously enough, is like more useful for a mage that's never gonna actually stab anything with it. It's like better to use to like sheath keening and then use spells. I think I can intuit what these mean. Now that we're down to just these. You get like the Dagoth dagger early on. You can find tons of glass daggers throughout the game. But Tontos are cool. Shimzel. I don't know what you're doing with short blades, really. I mean, I did a whole build around them. It was just worse than long blade the entire game. You're supposed to be able to stun lock any enemy to death, but you can also just kill them. And you can stun lock them with long blade too, so it's worthless, really. The argument I think is that early on you're supposed to pair it with enchanting, so you can use like damage enchantments like really powerfully and efficiently. But it just doesn't feel good ever. They're also really fragile, which is regularly annoying. Spear. I would put Spear above that. Spear's really overhyped for the damage range. There are a lot of battles if you tag in a Spear that you'll win that you won't win with a long blade because you can keep your opponent at reach. Which is like mechanically sound. Probably better than Destruction even. But at the end of the day, you don't end up with as high of weapons, and I think it has consistently worse enchant values than the other weapon types too. There's also not as much progression, unless I'm just missing something, but I think it's one of the more limited weapon types in terms of how many actual types of weapons there are for the skill. But like Bound Spear is really good, obviously. It's one of the better ones to summon early on. And the poking does have its uses. There are battles you'll win because you can stay at range. But I would say that Spear, you kind of need to pair it with something like Boots of Blinding Speed. If you're not gonna like really lean into speed early on. And then like it's governed by endurance as opposed to speed or strength. So it's good, but it's got some things tearing it apart. As opposed to Longblade, which is damage with strength, governed by strength. This is Sneak. It's better than Security. It is necessary. You do have to have Sneak to use Chameleon. Oh, yeah, Chameleon, by the way. One of the most powerful skill effects in the game. But you do have to have some Sneak to get away with Chameleon. Otherwise, you'll still get detected. You're not ever going to pick a pocket. I mean, you can hope, but it will never happen. Speechcraft. It's like better than Sneak. The problem is really just that you can ignore it. You can use Charm, you can use Fortified Personality, you can Bribe. And like you can just ignore it and then end up at like level 30 pretty easily and then just intimidate everyone in the game anyways. Speechcraft is really weird. I don't understand it completely. Everyone says taunting is like one of the strongest things you can do in the game, but I've never been able to figure out how it works from just playing the game. So. And unarmored. Marginally better than heavy armor just because of how fucking heavy armor is. Heavy armor is ridiculous, man. Like 300-pound armor sets is actual shit. I don't care that you have some of the best protection in the game if you can't carry anything else. Unarmored is obviously the worst, and in a meta sense, it is actually the worst skill in the game for armor, because anywhere that you can put unarmored, you can put an enchantment slot with armor. So like the Telvanni Cephalopod helm has 100 enchant on the head, that's insane. Robes, obviously, but then like pants and shirts and stuff like that have like, I think 40 and 60 or something, which you can't get with armor. So if you want to do constant effects, you have to have your clothing filled up, and then you want to do your armor with enchantments on top of that, so you just never end up using unarmored unless you just want to look at your character's head, which is really valid. I like looking at my character's head, so I like tagging unarmored and raising it up for speed, and then naturally getting some defense as I like have my character's head out. I installed a bald woman head mod, so I can use like a red guard with like a bald ass head. And like unarmored lets me look at the dome while you wear like a robe or something. You look super sick, but like it's not actually practical. Actually, it might be worse than heavy armor, because at least with heavy armor you get the chance slots. So, like, everything I said about all of the magic skills, restoration, mysticism, illusion, alteration, conjuration, and destruction, and all the impacts that all of these skills have on other skills, like making all weapons better, making shield better, making armor better, making your armor better, making you move faster, making you survive falls. Enchanting condenses all of that into your enchants. Anything you can do with magic, you can do with enchanting, and you can put it on any body slot, and it won't cost your magical pool to use. The only thing I think is that enchanting is somewhat balanced is that it's really hard to do early without exploits. Without exploits, getting your enchant to a usable skill is actually a bit tough, and you need Mercantile to do it. But if you're going to use exploits, then you use Alchemy. Alchemy is undoubtedly the top skill in the game. If you've ever seen the Alchemy snowball, you can't argue against that. You'd have to be ignorant to think Alchemy isn't the strongest skill in the game. If you want to do enchanting at level 1, you use Alchemy to get your enchant value up, your intelligence, and get a shit ton of money, and then go to your enchantments. And what makes Alchemy even stronger is that you don't even really need Mercantile to get it up there. Ashiams and Bloat are incredibly cheap to buy, even at the start of the game. And the money you'll make back from making them is fairly simple enough to just buy it and then get it back. You can just, like, do the money you get from, like, Satanine and that, like, Caius gives you for free. Go to the person in Sager's Mora. And there you go, you're like set. Just save before you do your first round of potions so you can get enough back to make more. There you go. That's all you gotta do. But yeah, you need Alchemy to rush enchanting, which is why it's better. Not to mention, you make potions for everything. Like, if you want to fortify an attribute, fortify it. If you want to fortify agility 200 points, now you can hit with any weapon. Fortify levitate. You can levitate anywhere. Restore fatigue, fortify magicka. Now you can cast any spell. Fortify willpower, now you can cast any spell. Restore health. You know. The only thing you can't, just fortify willpower, like 4,000 points, and you can cast any spell. That's every school of magic in the game bypassed. Fortify strength 200, fortify agility 200, that's all weapon skills in the game bypassed. I think you could even do shield. It's all the armor skills bypassed. Fortify personality, like 4,000 points. Fortify... Actually, I guess personality only caps at 100. So, like, fortify... For the sake of disposition, right? Disposition caps at 100. Fortify luck. 4,000 points, you know? Then you can successfully haggle any purchase. And with a super high luck skill, you can basically bypass sneak and speechcraft and security, even if you can't fortify those directly. Alchemy is king! But yeah, those are my tier lists. I don't have any specific outro or anything. I'm still working on the video. Don't worry. I'm gonna get the video out. But I'm a little sick of editing right now. It's such a pain in the ass to do this one because I have to capture all the footage myself. So I'm hoping for Christmas, but probably not. So don't get your hopes up. Setting the bar real low. Oh hey, we never put a 5th skill into magic, did we? Any of you keeping track at home, did we get a single athletics level this entire thing? That's not actually like a preset GIF. I actually have that tied to a real Morrowind character running. Because I wanted to see if we would get 1 athletics level this entire time. Anyways. Yeah, this was epic. I can't wait to listen back to myself and be like, no, you fucking idiot. You got that wrong. But yeah, I've actually come to grips. I'm gonna have to work. It's gonna be annoying to bring it up in the video. I've come around to certain things on Morrowind that I didn't used to, like delaying the Dark Brotherhood attack so I can't get the gear immediately. Allowing fatigue to be a part of the game, because overcoming it is a issue with like getting your alchemy or restoration high enough. And like, I do think it is poor design that you need magic to overcome fatigue, essentially. But at the same time, I'm always going to use magic, so it's fine for me. But it is still poor design, I would say. But yeah, tell me what I got wrong. Tell me